So you saw The Woman King.
Yes.
Did you connect to the movie in any particular way?
As a mother, I have a kid, and that part really inspired me because a mother's bond is never to be broken. You could see that.
It was really nice to see people that looked like me doing cool stuff in movies, like not just like a background role.
Did you feel represented by the film?
As a West African person, like being able to see what our culture looked like rendered so vividly in a movie that had such a big budget was just like so fulfilling and so exciting.
The vulnerability aspect, like I definitely feel things, but I don't really show them because like it's hard to as a Black woman. So I definitely identified with that.
It gave me goosebumps. I'm just like, wow, all these women sticking together, coming to one common cause.
It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and welcome to the show. The Oscars are next week, and as happens almost every year, this year's Academy Awards have forced yet another conversation about whether that institution actually values the work of Black people, of women, and of others who have had to make space for themselves in the cultural economy. The Academy has never even nominated a Black woman for Best Director and has only nominated 2 women, period. This year, a lot of people thought that would change, given all the buzz around the film The Woman King and all the honors that director Gina Prince-Bythewood has received. The movie enjoyed remarkable success at the box office. It was led by a big-name star in Viola Davis. It received widespread critical acclaim. And frankly, it's exactly the kind of epic film that is often described as Oscar bait. And yet, it received exactly 0 nominations. Zip, zilch, none. And certainly no Best Director nod. Gina Prince-Bythewood has not held her tongue about this snub. She told The Hollywood Reporter that The Woman King's total shutout is, quote, a reflection of where the Academy stands and the consistent chasm between Black excellence and recognition. And sadly, this is not just an issue in Hollywood, but in every industry. I caught up with Gina Prince-Bythewood right as The Woman King debuted on Netflix as the #1 most watched film on that platform. Throughout her long career, she has been known in the industry as someone who is actively making space for women of color, both in front of and behind the camera. Our conversation is part of an ongoing series we're calling Black History Is Now. And in the series, we're collecting the stories of people who are themselves living history and who are thinking about what came before them, what might come after them. Later in the hour, we're actually going to ask you to call in with stories about people in your own world who are living history as well. So stick around for that. But for Gina, she has said that The Woman King, which tells the story of an all-female group of warriors in the Dahomey Kingdom of West Africa during the era of the Atlantic slave trade, Gina has said that this film represents everything she always dreamed about doing. So I asked her to explain why that's the case.
I love historical epics. And it's interesting, I had a desire to do it, but I knew that the industry was not caught up to my dream. And so it remained a dream. And then the script came, and it was a historical epic that centered us and centered Black women and told a part of our history that's been erased. And when it wasn't erased, it was debased and told incorrectly. And so to be able to tell our history from our point of view, do the right research, the deep dive, and hear from the ancestors, whose story we're telling, it's an incredible feeling. And it was a profound experience to make this film with this group of women, these incredible actors and artists who were as passionate about telling the story and telling our story as I was on the continent. And then to have it have the impact that it has had, it's like I said, it's a dream.
When you said it, the industry hadn't caught up to your dreams yet, what did you mean? Can you just spell that out a little more?
The genres that we have been in have been limited, and there hasn't been a historical epic. I mean, the last, I think, was Shaka Zulu. And how long ago was that? And I'm talking about the big historical epics of, and certainly focused on the continent, a historical epic that doesn't start and say that our history begins with enslavement. Hollywood was not checking for that ever. It took Viola Davis and Kathy Schulman, Julius Ten and Maria Bello, our producers, it took them 6 years to even find a place that would fund this film. And even then, when I came aboard, it took a year to get that green light. I often say, but it's true, Black Panther absolutely showed Hollywood that we could make a film in this space and it would do well. But even then, it was still a fight.
Right.
But success begets success. And now I'm happy that the Woman King and its success is now going to open the door for others to be able to tell those stories that they've been dreaming to do.
Yeah. And is it the historical epic part about it or the action film part about it? Because I was also like, what does it mean to have made this, for you to have made this as an action film? Because it's a very, it's like, I don't want to say old school, but it's like an action film.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. You know, it is Gladiator and Last of the Mohicans, and like those were the templates, certainly. But again, look at the templates I'm naming.
Right.
You know, I think it's, you know, the size of the budget. I think it's the genre. I think it's who is fronting it. The fact that Black women were at the forefront of it. Obviously, John Boyega plays the king and he's phenomenal in it. But yeah, there was no template for this. Hollywood needs templates. They need to look at something and say, okay, that made money, so if we make this, it'll make money. There was no comp for this. And so it was a leap of faith. And it does show the power of having a Black head of studio. There's only 2 in our entire industry. And Nicole Brown is one of them. She heads up TriStar, and she fought for this. She saw the value in it and fought for it.
Gina Prince-Bythewood stepped into Hollywood at a special time in popular culture. It was the early 1990s, and we've talked about this era before in Black music, the moment when hip-hop and R&B began to just dominate pop. But there was an analogous movement happening in film and TV at the time.
I know my parents loved me.
When there was just this eruption of shows and movies made by and for young Black people. It was perhaps best represented by the sitcom A Different World.
It's a different world. It's a different world.
This was a spinoff of The Cosby Show, set on the campus of a fictional historically Black college and featuring the sweet, silly, stylish adventures of a group of Gen X Black folks. The lead characters, Dwayne and Whitley, became iconic roles, and a young Gina Prince-Bythewood got a chance to write their stories.
I was so blessed to step into the industry in the way that I did. It was my first job, and I was 22 and, you know, less than a year out of college. A Different World was my favorite show. So to be able to go in there and like go from watching Dwayne and Whitley to writing for Dwayne and Whitley was amazing. The show was run by Black women, Susan Fales Hill, and she was young. She was like 29 years old running this top show. Debbie Allen was the producing director running it. Yvette Lee Bowser, who was a producer who has had great success in this industry, she took me under her wing and taught me so much. So I had these Black women surrounding me, protecting me, but also it was my normal to see Black women running it. And it was just an incredible time. And the other amazing thing was learning that the enrollment at HBCUs went up dramatically because of the show. And to learn and understand the power of what we do that early in my career, like has never left me. The power of image and our image and how it can be used in such positive ways like that. So it was just, I'm so blessed to have started on A Different World, 100%.
You said it was your normal to be surrounded by these Black women. Put that in relationship to what was actually normal in the industry at the time.
Oh, man, when I left the bubble of A Different World, the next Well, this is the thing. So I started in sitcom, started on a different world, but my dream, my goal at that time, in addition to being a filmmaker, making movies, was to write dramatic series. It was a desert for Black folks at that time. And so I went from a different world to South Central, and South Central was a really great experience. And then moving into drama, suddenly the next 3 drama shows I was on, I was the only one. And it was really tough because, okay, this is a perfect example. I get on the show Sweet Justice, and it's about Cicely Tyson, and Cicely Tyson's amazing.
Right.
She plays a formal civil rights activist who is now an attorney and has a law firm and is taking on civil rights cases. And it co-stars Melissa Gilbert. I come on the show, the only Black writer, and I'm looking at the cast, and the cast is all white except for Cicely Tyson. And I talked with the showrunner. I said, "This is a woman who was a civil rights activist. She wouldn't hire any Black lawyers. She would have no Black friends, no one Black in her life. It made no sense, but it didn't even cross their minds."
Wow.
So it was me fighting to get another Black lawyer in this firm, which ended up being Cree Summer. Cree was great in it. And then suddenly, yes, we get to create these stories, centering her character. But that's what I faced in every show that I was on, fighting for our images. And because literally every time, at the beginning of a season, you map out the arc of every character. And every single show is the Black character either had a brother or sister in jail or a brother and sister who was an addict. That was it. That was the arc. Whereas the white characters have these full, cool whole lives and love interests. And it was just every single time. And so every single time I'm fighting for more for our characters. It was just, yeah, that's what it was back then.
I'm talking with Gina Prince-Bythewood, director of The Woman King, about her long career in Hollywood. Coming up, she reflects on her directorial debut, a pure love story that is still, decades later, considered a classic in Black film. And we will talk about the Oscars. Stay with us. It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and I'm talking with filmmaker Gina Prince-Bythewood, who directed the box office hit The Woman King, starring Viola Davis. The film may not have won the attention of the Academy Awards, but it has left a clear mark in the culture. And it's not Gina's first time making a movie that's had this kind of impact. Her directorial debut, which came out in the year 2000, was the film Love and Basketball. It tells the story of two successful young Black athletes just trying to figure out how to be in love. That's it. And it became an immediate and lasting classic. This is a film that we've talked about before on the show. It is remains such an important touchstone for so many Black people, particularly those who were young at that time. What is it about it you think that made such a personal connection with so many Black filmgoers?
I wish I knew, because I would bottle it up and I would do it every single time. It is still literally, it is stunning and humbling to me that people still watch it and watch it a lot. And as they grow up, they share it with their kids, and teenagers watch it. And I don't know why. I know I love it because of what I was saying to the world. I know I was eager as a director and a writer. I'm my first audience, and I was writing what I wanted to see. And I feel like I wanted to see us in a love story, and I wasn't seeing that. And I wanted it not to be a romantic comedy, but like a proper love story. And I think putting a young Black woman in the world that we hadn't seen, someone like that. I hope certainly with Quincy's character too, that it was a true two-hander, that it wasn't, one person with a sidekick love interest, but that you get to follow both of these characters and their lives and their traumas and their joys and their loves. I don't know. There's a lot of truth in it as well. That was, so much of my life I got to pour into it. My husband as well, a lot of his life. So maybe also there was that amount of truth that people could see themselves in these characters, even if you weren't an athlete, what they were going through, what they were pushing for, what they were searching for. Maybe a lot of people could see themselves in Monica and Quincy.
We talked previously to Omar Epps, who was the lead Quincy in this film. And I'll put a theory to you that we came up with in that conversation, that both Love and Basketball and A Different World were representations in which there were whole Black worlds that were not defined by racism or struggle or really white people in any way. And that was not something you saw beyond, the Cosby Show, I guess. Was that intentional?
I would say it wasn't. I didn't say that out loud, but I know my inspiration literally was, I want to make a Black When Harry Met Sally. I had loved that film. I didn't see us getting to have ourselves in those type of films where it's just people, going through life and finding each other and finding your soulmate and finding love. And yeah, I know it was intentional where I wanted to set it, what their neighborhood was, what the parents did, because I wasn't seeing those type of characters. Obviously, you see him and we see him in our own lives, but you don't see him reflected in TV or film. You were seeing a sameness. So that part of it was intentional, but it's really interesting. I've never actually said it the way that you just said it. And so I'm going to take that.
You're welcome to it. Go on, I can help. When the Academy Award nominations came out and The Woman King got 0 nominations, it sparked yet another year of outrage and frustration over which films get honored, which ones get ignored. Gina Prince-Bythewood shared her own frustration. She said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter that, quote, "The Academy made a very loud statement, and for me to stay quiet is to accept that statement." And she went on to make a point about why these awards matter at all. It's kind of her answer to people who say, who cares what the stupid Academy thinks in the first place?
It is a fascinating thing where when you talk about this, often the answer that you get is, why do you care? Don't care about awards. Don't care about the validation of white people. But as I said in the interview, the fact that people are seeing the Academy as a white institution says a lot right there. But in this industry, in terms of HODs, and that's heads of department, costume, hair and makeup, editors, cinematographers, it's really hard to get gigs and certainly get films on this level.
Now, Gina, can you break down what is an HOD?
So you have the head of the makeup department, head of wardrobe, the cinematographer, the editor, and then they are in charge of hiring everyone underneath.
They're basically the hiring manager that we think about in other industries. Fascinating.
Yeah. And the majority of my HODs, almost all were women or people of color.
But she says she had to fight to get those people on The Woman King because their resumes didn't show the kinds of work that, in the eyes of Hollywood executives, qualified them for a movie of this size. To Gina, they were clearly qualified, but their experience just was not immediately legible to the studio system.
Now, let's say you have a Academy Award nomination, just a nomination, not even a win.
Mm-hmm.
Say you have a nomination on your resume. Now, suddenly, it's not just going to be Black directors looking out for you. Other directors are going to look out and see that and be like, oh, I want that person because that person has gotten that stamp of approval, you know, that their talent is good enough. That's what it does. And it also helps that I don't have to fight for you to be on my crew anymore. It's just an automatic because studios look at that nomination and say, oh, they must be good. It's not enough for me to say it. They need validation from others. That's a huge thing in our industry. Absolutely. And it as a director, it gives you so much. Final cut. When you have an Oscar nom, you have final cut.
What is final cut and why is that important?
Final cut technically means that you have the last say on the film, the final product of the film. What happens often is you make a film and then you get a ton of notes and you have test screenings and then you get more notes based on that. And suddenly you're agreeing to things that are going against your vision. And then at the end, you look up on the screen and you don't recognize the film. That's never happened to me. But the level of fight it takes to protect your vision is extraordinary. And I know it's taken a toll on me after 20 years. And it doesn't need to be that hard.
Yeah.
So that's what these nominations, why they're important.
And to take that why it matters just one more step forward, then, like, why does it matter that these films that center Black stories that are made by Black people exist in the first place? And I know it sounds like a basic question, but for you, why does it actually matter beyond like, oh, I got to see a cool film?
You have to be able to see yourself reflected. I mean, the power of film and television, as I said earlier, the fact that enrollment for HBCUs went up dramatically when young Black kids or teenagers are watching a show and they see people that look like them in college. Suddenly, they can see themselves in college. It's as simple as that. You think about how many superhero films before Black Panther had come out. Think of all the little white kids who get to grow up believing themselves as heroes. We didn't have that. And that's a stunning thing. What can that do to your psyche to grow up and know that you can be a hero? And what does that do to your psyche if you've never seen that for yourself? So the excitement, I know when I sat in Black Panther with my two boys, the way they walked out of that film with their chests just up and pumped. And now with The Woman King and seeing online these videos of little girls chanting Wusu. It's amazing. That's the power of what we do.
Gina Prince-Bythewood is the director, most recently, of The Woman King. Thank you so much for this time and for your work, Gina.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
History is always on our minds here at Notes from America, but particularly so right now. We've, of course, just finished Black History Month. We're just starting Women's History Month. And these annual celebrations are, at least in part, about crafting a new version of our national story, a version that includes people who have been written out of it, often because our lives and our contributions complicate the existing version of our national story. As the Notes from America team has been thinking about our own role in crafting a new version of the national history, we came across a really, really cool project that we thought maybe we can try a version of this live on our show. So bear with me. In a moment, I'll set up what we're all going to do together. But first, let me introduce our guest. Julieanna Richardson is the founder of the HistoryMakers. This is a project that uses video oral histories to capture the untold personal stories of African Americans, one person at a time. There are now more than 3,400 oral histories in the HistoryMakers database, some famous, some everyday people. It's housed at the Library of Congress and available in a digital archive online, and among its many purposes is to be used in educational settings. Julieanna Richardson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kai. It's really nice to be here.
So this project was born from your own personal experience digging around in the archives at the Schomburg Center for Black History here in New York, as way back in the 1970s. Can you share your origin story with us on this work?
Sure. I grew up in a small town in called Newark, Ohio, not New Jersey, for those of you who are on the East Coast. And we really never said anything about Black people. I mean, George Washington Carver and his peanuts and slavery. Yeah. And so my 9-year-old brain couldn't compute that my white teacher was telling me he could do all these things with peanuts when all we had been were slaves. And then one day, the same teacher asked us to talk about our family backgrounds. And literally, I mean, the kids' hands were going up. I'm part German, I'm part French. I mean, at a dizzying speed. And I was like, I didn't know what to say because I didn't know at that point, Black, it wasn't Black and I'm proud. So maybe I was Negro. And then I said Native American because most Black people think they have Native American in them. And then I had it in French because my father had been stationed there. So I lied, because I wanted to be sexy like the others. Oh, wow. They knew what, It wasn't until that fateful day at the Schomburg Library when I was doing research on the Harlem Renaissance that I had this awakening and went around interviewing people at that time. Butterfly McQueen, who had starred in Gone with the Wind, tap dancer Honey Coles, historian John Henry Clark, and a man named Lee Whipper, who was the oldest living Black actor at the time. He had been born in 1887. So that's the beginning. And
you at the time you were a student, but you were not a historian. And in fact, you went on to be a lawyer, to have an illustrious career in law and media and all these other things. Right. What made you, it wasn't until 2000, I think, that you came back and started the HistoryMakers. Yeah, 1999. 1999. What brought you? You get to a point where you start wanting to give back and, do something for society. And those stories, I was talking to lots of friends and, the backgrounds of their families were so fascinating and they were not in the public parlance. And think about, there's been discussion like even at that point, there was the Cosby Show and people were thinking that was not, at the beginning that Black people didn't live like this. There are all these stories. I mean, really, really, really rich stories of people's backgrounds. And so those stories stayed with me, that I had done as a young college student. And I wanted to, at that point, I don't know about the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. Don't know about that project, which after Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List, he went out to, he was motivated to interview all living and willing Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. So it was in the planning phase that people from the Jewish community started telling me about the Shoah Foundation. I checked them out, but I had, at that point, I'd already written a concept paper. I had two friends who did an intervention on a Saturday. They were like, "What are you doing?" I'd actually gone to National Bar Association conference in
Memphis, because I was without a job. That's another thing. I was out of job.
It'll focus the mind a lot of times.
That's right. Focus the mind, because I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I was very confused about what my next steps would be. It's been a long time since I practiced law. And so I went to this Bar Association conference, and there was Reverend Billy Kyles and Justice Constance Baker Motley, and more importantly, Judge Leon Higginbotham, who I loved and adored. And this is the time of the Clarence Thomas hearings, where people, and he had been invited to the conference. And so the name came to me, and I came back, and I was like, I know what I want to do. I want to do an archive of Black people. And my friend, who had been head of our local PBS station, she had been indexing the collection, because a lot of TV stations had thrown away their material. So
their
she was
conversations
indexing
with these Black women.
And so I went, and that was it. I said, I'm going to do an archive. She didn't think it was a good idea, but my friend said, ask two questions. Ask if answer for archive, like you envision, does it exist already? And if it doesn't exist, and one would be created, would anyone be interested? They said they theorized no, but those are the two questions I set out to answer.
Okay. Well, we need to take a little break. Listeners, as I said, we're going to try to do something similar to Julieanna's work with you. We can't do a formal oral history, but maybe we can capture the spirit of things. I want to know, do you have a story of someone living or dead in your community whose history you think needs to be captured, but probably won't make it into the history books? Call us up and tell us their 30-second story, 844-745-TALK. That's 844-745-8255. Julieanna is collecting the stories of African Americans. For this hour, we're open to stories from any community, though since it's Women's History Month, we'll give special preference to stories about women. But tell us about someone in your community, living or dead, whose story you think needs to be captured. Like if you had an oral history project going like the one at the HistoryMakers, who would you include? 844-745-TALK. That's 844-745-8255. If you're watching on YouTube, you can give a short synopsis there. Maybe you can just pick up the phone and call too and keep watching with a story of someone in your community, living or dead, whose history needs to be captured and who probably won't make it into the history books. I'm talking with Julieanna Richardson, founder of the HistoryMakers. We will take a short break and take your calls after. Stay with us. It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and I'm joined by Julieanna Richardson, who is founder of the HistoryMakers Digital Archive It's a project that has collected thousands of video oral histories of African Americans, both famous and unsung. And listeners, as Julieanna tells us about her work, we are asking you to call us up with your own stories. I want to hear about someone living or past in your community whose story will probably not make it into the history books, but that you think needs to be captured. Tell us their 30-second story, 844-745-TALK. That's 844-745-8255. And again, Julieanna's collecting stories about African Americans, but we're open to stories from any community. It's Women's History Month, so we're really excited to hear stories about women. But whoever it is, someone in your community, living or dead, whose story won't likely make it into the history books, but you think needs to be captured. 844-745-TALK. That's 844-745-8255. Julieanna, one of the neat things about the HistoryMakers archives is that is that a lot of the interviews start with these sort of detailed, mundane questions to get people going. So, like, what's your favorite food? So, what's your favorite food, Julieanna? Can you tell me just? And why do you start the conversations that way? But first,
well,
what is your favorite food?
we actually started. I actually. One of my favorite foods is salmon, but we actually started to ask people those questions because a lot of what we're doing at the beginning is bringing people to a point of memory, and also relaxing people with questions to sort of catch them off guard because they're sitting there, thinking they're going to do something very serious in terms of their life oral history, and we see people relaxing, as we really start the process of reawakening memory.
Well, did you share your favorite food though just now?
I did. I said salmon.
Okay, that's right. You said salmon. Sorry, I got so drawn into the answer.
Okay.
Well, I want to share a clip from one of the notable but not famous people in the archive. This is Shirley Ann Jackson. She is a physicist. She was the first woman to receive a PhD in physics from MIT in 1973, and she later chaired the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 4 years. So this is her telling an anecdote about her time in the women's dorm as a Black woman doing her work. It's about a minute long.
I've told people the story of the first physics problem set, and I had been working on it for a period of time and was working my way through the problems. And then I got up to go to the restroom. And so when I went out into the hall, I see all these women on my floor out there working on these problem sets. And so I went in and did my thing, washed my hands, went back to my room, and I gathered up my papers and went out and said, "May I join you?" And one of them looked up and says, "Go away." And I said, "Well, I've done half the problems, and I think the answers are right, and I think I know how to do the other half." Other one, didn't you hear her? She said, "Go away." So I went back to my room, and I actually cried for about half hour, 45 minutes. But then I decided I had to finish my physics problem set. So I went back to the problems.
I love that. And then I decided I had to go back to work. So I went back to work. And I share that one. I'd love to hear your reaction to it, Julieanna, but I share that one because you've got a whole section of the archive dedicated to people in science. And I want to know about why you chose that.
No, thank you for playing that. I actually did her interview, and I don't have memory of that story.
Well, you've done thousands.
That's right. Well, I've done myself about 500 of the,
Wow.
of the interviews, but I want to say that first of all, everybody should know Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson. She was just recently stepped down as president of Rensselaer Polytechnic. She is a noted scientist, a noted business and leader and education leader and STEM leader. She serves on, major corporate boards, so that's where the business comes in. But she was head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission under President Clinton. So the fact that she's telling that story, and you think of kids now, like there's a lot of trying to find your way, a lot of, things like bullying, but in this case, it's like she doesn't exist. And how did she go on to be the first female, black or white, to graduate with her PhD in physics at MIT, when obviously she did okay on those story sets?
Obviously.
When you think about it, no one was willing to work with her, and look what ended up happening.
Right.
And so I just think that, for young people and for anyone who's trying to find their way, that story itself would be, within context, would be very inspirational. The other thing is that STEM brought us through COVID.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We are at a time where we are remembering the value of of this field. Okay, well, let's take some calls. Let's go to V in Chicago. V, welcome to the show.
Hi.
How you doing, V? Do you have a person whose story you'd like to share with us? Who you think this is a person whose story needs to be recorded?
Absolutely. I want to share my grandmother. My grandmother is the first black female that the Chicago Board of Trade hired as a director in 1971. She's still living. She retired in 1994, so next year will be 30 years she's been retired. She was in charge of the mailroom, office services, and reprographics, and her name is Erdine R. Bryson.
Say her name one more time.
Her name is Erdine R. Renee, last name Bryson.
Okay, Ardeen, let's lift her up. That's wonderful. Thank you for calling and sharing that, V. And
Thank you.
Thank you. And Julieanna, the folks like that, your archive includes people who, we have some, again, there are famous people. I think Barack Obama's in there, but there are also, as I've said, people who are not famous. Why is that important to you? Why is it important?
Oh, it was extremely important because you don't know where history lies, right? We're doing people's life oral histories. About 50% of our subjects know a lot about their family background, 50% don't know much at all. But we were really trying to pick up where the slave narratives left off. And so, a lot of times we were paying attention. We have the place on our site where people can recommend people to us. Like there's a woman named Jenny Lagan who got recommended to us. And she's the famous, if you watch any old black and white movies, she's from Chicago. She was the famous tap dancer, wow. Female tap dancer. So You just don't know where history lies.
You don't know where history lies. Let's go to Brett in Elgin, Illinois. Brett.
Hi there. I wanted to mention my grandfather. His name was Russell Seitz. He was born in 1904. He passed in 1992. He passed when I was 15, so there was a lot that I didn't get to ask him about. But later in life, I always marveled at the fact that he lived through so many major events throughout the 20th century. He was too young for World War I, and they lived through the Depression, and too old for World War II, and just all the different things that he saw between the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Kennedy assassination and going to the moon. And it fascinated me that this man who, he was born in Cerro Gordo, Illinois, and he ran his own trucking company before World War II, and he built houses. He was an electrician and a carpenter, mostly self-taught. And I thought he was a treasure trove of information that, as a 15-year-old, you don't think to document.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, Brett. Let's go to Wendy in Springfield, New Jersey. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Yes, I would like to lift up Imogene Johnson, who is now dead, but she's originally from Chicago. And here in Springfield, New Jersey, she was the principal of a middle school, but what she was most known for in our community was anything that you had a problem with, whether it was something with an agency or something with somebody wanted to learn something. She knew someone who could connect you with someone. She was the person you went to. She was the community godmother. And when she was younger, she went to the continent, I think it was Liberia, with a group of teachers to train teachers in Liberia. And I know that from the eulogy when I went to her funeral. But a wonderful person, Invision Johnson, and she's originally from Chicago. She grew up in the Ida B. Wells projects there. But she came to New Jersey, and she was the light of our life and my son's other grandmother.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Wendy. And UC on YouTube says Richard A. Smith, 1932, was a Black physician who was part of a 5-person team composing the Surgeon General's Office of Equal Health Opportunity, which desegregated the U.S. hospitals in the mid-1960s. So thank you for that, UC. You mentioned, Julieanna, the slave narratives at one point, and this is the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, collected narratives in the early 20th century of formerly enslaved people. Just for folks, first off, who aren't familiar with that project, give us a quick sense of what that was, catch people up on that, and then like how you see, because you said you see this as you see the HistoryMakers as a continuation of that work.
Yeah. So between the years of 1936 and 38, right after the Great Depression, under the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, there was what was called the Works Projects Administration. And so they put people basically back to work. And one of the projects was to interview the formerly enslaved. So there were 2,300 interviewed between the years of 1936 and 38. And there are funny stories about that, where one formerly enslaved was interviewed by a white person and a Black person, and they had totally different stories. Zora Neale Hurston is probably the most well-known Black person who worked on that project. I want to say one thing, though, to also some of the people have called in. It's really important. You'll get to a point where you really want to know more. And if you can just take out your iPhone or recorder and just sit down and talk with family members. And, we really need to rescue the history. We're about to lose most of the 20th century.
It's a really, really stark point that those of us of a certain age are starting to realize, because we can look at our families and say, oh my goodness, the 20th century is slipping away from us. So good note if you're thinking about it, just take out your phone and start recording somebody in your family that you think should be captured for history. Let's go to Onika in Brooklyn. Onika, welcome to the show. Oh, we've lost Onika. Well, while we try to get her back, or before we get to our next call, on the WPA former narratives of formerly enslaved people, finish the thought on how this project, because you mentioned that you felt like this project was filling a gap that was left after that.
So essentially, that was our enslaved history, but there have been no attempt to record the history after that. And I even talk about Reconstruction, which we don't really know a lot about. And that is really sort of harmful because, during Reconstruction, there were thousands of Black politicians that we don't know the names of. So that's what was important. The thing that I want to say is that we're housed at the Library of Congress since 2014. They became our permanent repository. So because they're also the repository of the WPA slave narratives, in one place now are the stories of the formerly enslaved and the progeny of the formerly enslaved. So I just think that's pretty wonderful. But this is a project that we need lots of people helping us with. And I really think we will be heading the way, or forging the way, this Black project with others who have lost American stories. So you were talking, to the listeners about who else has, stories. There are lots of lost American stories.
And you said you need lots of help with this project. How can people help with this project? Is this something that people can just chip into?
Volunteers, funding, interviewers, recommendations, though it takes us some time to get through things and prioritize. Each interview costs $6,000.
Wow.
It's not just the interviewing, it's the archiving. Right. So we're a very serious oral history project, but we are also a very serious archive.
Is it the case? I believe I saw that at one point you looked in the archive and you felt like women were underrepresented in the archive that you were making.
Yeah. You heard this.
And
Yes. No.
tell me about that. How did you notice that? And why do you think it was the case?
Okay, God, I could not notice it because there are 800 less women than men, and this is a women-led project. It wasn't, intentional. Like, I could interview John Johnson, founder of, Johnson Publishing, Ebony and Jet, but I couldn't get Eunice Johnson to interview, and so that happened. And so I just think over time it got to this catastrophic level. And if it weren't for Ursula Burns, the former CEO of Xerox, who stepped forward to fund it, and so we formed a Women Makers Advisory Committee. We've got the women leaders helping us across different disciplines, and so we're really starting to change that. But it happened over a period of 2 decades.
Yeah. I have to ask you, we've only got about 60 seconds here for this, but we do exist in a moment where an effort to interrogate American history is under direct political attack. And given that your work happens in educational institutions as well, I just wonder if that has shown up in your work at all, and if not, just how you feel about the work you're doing in this political moment.
Okay. First of all, our work started over 2 decades ago. So I think our agenda has already been set and we're not responding to Ron DeSantis or anyone else. So that's one thing. The second is that, yes, it has shown up. We have had, prior to any of this uproar and use in the classroom, where some students in their reviews said that they resented having to study about Black people. But there are also an equal number of people who we're giving life to, and we're changing the narrative of African-American achievement in history. And so that's what I think is most important.
We will have to leave it there. Julieanna Richardson is founder of the HistoryMakers. It's a video oral history of African Americans with more than 3,500 entries housed at the Library of Congress and used in educational institutions and others. It's at thehistorymakers.org. Julieanna, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Notes from America is a production of WNYC Studios. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and on Instagram at Notes with Kai. Our theme music and sound design is by Jared Paul. Milton Ruiz was at the boards for our live show tonight. Our team also includes Karen Frillman, Vanessa Handy, Regina DeHeer, Rahima Nassa, Kusha Navadar, and Lindsay Foster Thomas. Andre Robert Lee is our executive producer, and I am Kai Wright. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.